So my mom's arrived, so we could start. It's waiting for you, Mom. All right, so let's begin. I'm gonna, do some more idle chit-chat in the beginning, so that allow a little more time for any stragglers to come on in. And so I guess I'll say it again. So I'm Father Nathan Pacer, and it's so good to be back here at Holy Cross, and I keep saying it, and I keep meaning it. Holy Cross was so important for my formation, for my accepting of my priestly vocation. And so it's really good being back here. There's just this reality when you get ordained a priest. I had this idea that, I'd get back more to Holy Cross, but I haven't. As I've mentioned in some other masses, since my first mass until today, I had only been back, I think, one funeral within the second week of my priesthood, so I really have not been back at all. And just also, too, studying for seminary, and I've been away from the parish, and it's so funny doing the masses, and I don't recognize most of the people here at Holy Cross, and so that's the reality I'm learning, things change, right? But all good changes, and so it's so good to be back here, and just want to first off starting, thank you for anyone, whether you're here from Holy Cross or from another parish, especially Holy Cross, just going through seminary, I just knew there were so many people from here, my home parish, praying for me, and I just needed those prayers. Those prayers helped sustain me through the harder parts of formation, and allowed me to be a priest, to hold to that yes that I wanted to give the Lord. And so, speaking of prayer, let's begin with prayer. I want to share with you one of my favorite prayers. And, it's called A Godly Meditation, and it's composed by St. Thomas More. And it was composed by him when he was imprisoned in the Tower of London, after refusing to cower to Henry VIII. And anytime we pray, there's an idea of aspiration involved with it. Some of the best prayers, there's something we're moving towards. Some of the words we say, we don't fully feel necessarily, but we want to feel. And the prayer we're going to pray this evening is a hard prayer. And so you might not be at, perhaps, where St. Thomas More was when he was about to face his martyrdom. But even within this prayer, you see the aspirational quality that he wants to be what he's not. He wants to strive for sanctity, and he needs help. We all need help. So we'll begin. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Give me your grace, good Lord, to set the world at naught, to set my mind fast upon you, and not to hang upon the blast of men's mouths, to be content to be solitary, not to long for worldly company, little and little utterly to cast off the world, and rid my mind of all the business thereof, not to long to hear of any worldly things, but that hearing of worldly fantasies may be to me displeasant, gladly to be thinking of God, piteously to call for his help, to lean unto the comfort of God, busily to labor to love him, to know mine own vility and wretchedness, to humble and meeken myself under the mighty hand of God, to bewail my sins past for the purging of them, patiently to suffer adversity, gladly to bear my purgatory here, to be joyful of tribulations, to walk the narrow way that leadeth to life, to bear the cross with Christ, to have the last thing, death, in remembrance, to have ever afore mine eyes my death that is ever at hand, to make death no stranger to me, to foresee and consider the everlasting fire of hell, to pray for pardon before the judge comes, to have continually in mind the passion that Christ suffered for me, for his benefits incessantly, to give him thanks, to buy the time again that I before have lost, to abstain from vain confabulations, to eschew light foolish mirth and gladness, recreations not necessary to cut off, of worldly substance, friends, liberty, life, and all, to see the loss as naught for the winning of Christ, to think my most enemies my best friends, for the brethren of Joseph could never have done him so much good with their love and favor, as they did him with their malice and hatred. St. Thomas More, pray for us. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. That's a hard prayer, right? That's really hard, you know? The idea to acknowledge that sometimes the vility of friends, of brothers against us might create a greater work within us, might be a greater aid to us in reaching our goal, eternal life. And so I hope it's a little obvious perhaps why I chose this prayer. It speaks a lot about the end things, about purgatory and hell. And so, which is the theme of the talk, and I'll kind of unpack that as we go along. And so one of my favorite movies of all times is a late 90s movie called Meet Joe Black. Has anyone ever seen that? I'm just kind of curious, okay. Yeah, it's not necessarily a very popular one, so I'm not expecting tons of hands, but nonetheless, I love this movie because for several reasons. First off, I think it really sheds light on what it means to be magnanimous in the main character, Bill Parish. It also has one of the most beautiful daughter-father relationships I've seen come out of Hollywood between the main character, Bill Parish, and his daughter. And also, it just, a work of art that helps artistically and insightfully give a glimpse into love, death, and the meaning of life. In the beginning, the main character, Bill Parish, played by the great Anthony Hopkins. He's a successful businessman who's built this incredibly large communications company called Parish Communications from the ground up. And at the beginning of the movie, we discover that he's approaching his 65th birthday. And there's this big flurry of activity around the preparation of its celebration. In the second scene, for example, we see him exiting out of this beautiful, more Romanesque mansion that's located on a bay. And as he's walking down this long stretch of garden and lawn to catch a copter to get into New York, so it's showing you that he's a big, businessman. There's a crane putting up a pavilion. There's an army of florists, electricians, and service workers helping, to put all the preparations together for this big celebration of his 65th birthday. And to show the grandness of the occasion, we even hear his daughter Allison saying that it has a guest list that would do the White House proud. But something's off. In the opening scene, Bill wakes up in the middle of the night in pain. And in the darkness, seemingly out of nowhere, the simple word, yes, is heard at unexpected intervals. In the following scenes, this yes is heard again and again, eventually followed by other phrases previously used by Bill Parish. The voiceover is Bill's, though it does not come from him. It has a character of its own. The voice is a little bit more sinister than the one we see portrayed on the screen. Who is this voice? We, the audience, and Bill Parish wonder. Our suspense is soon relieved 20 minutes into the movie when Bill Parish is interrupted at dinner by an unexpected guest. He excuses himself to go and see who it is. In his large private library filled with leather-bound books and leather chairs, in this penthouse above the New York skyline, he begins to have a conversation with a voice. We don't see who is behind the voice, just the outline of a figure in clouded glass. I now want to share with you just an important snippet of that conversation. And if you guys had a projector, I would show the scene, and I thought about portraying it myself, but the reality matter is I'm no Anthony Hopkins, and so we're going to do this kind of I'm going to play the audio through the microphone, so hopefully it works. Here we go. Bear with me.
Yeah. Guess what? Yes is the answer to your question. question. Oh, Bill, come on. The question. The question you've been asking yourself with increased regularity, at odd moments, panting through the extra game of handball, when you ran for the plane in Delhi, when you sat up in bed last night and hit the floor in the office this morning. The question that is in the back of your throat, choking the blood to your brain, ringing in your ears over and over, as you put it to yourself. The question. Yes, Bill. The question. The question. Am I going to die? Yes.
So what you didn't see was the figure steps from the glass, and it's a young man in a suit played by Brad Pitt. And so forgive me for kind of this long buildup. It was just all to kind of set the stage so I can tell you that yes, you are going to die. You are going to die. Now this should seem obvious, right? Nothing is more certain than death and taxes, as the saying goes. And yet, I don't think this truth often registers for us on a deeper level. And this is especially true, I think, when we're young, right? When you're young, especially when you're in good health, there's this feeling of invincibility. And especially if you haven't had a lot of more sudden, unexpected deaths in your lives, death feels this abstract thing that's very far off. And it's funny, too, because there's even people who don't believe it'll even come. I was talking to my brother Tom, and he was telling me that his boss believes in 30 years there won't be death because of, the advances in medical sciences, this transhumanism, all these things, too. And so there are some people out there, who believe they won't die. And obviously, for as long as we know it, people have been chasing after the elixir of life with the hope of not dying to avoid this most certain of fates. But this can also be true with older people, I've discovered in my own experience. I remember counseling a family who had lost their 98-year-old grandma, and their mother, 98-year-old mother. And, they were distraught, rightly so. But just like talking to them, it seemed like it came as a surprise. And again, obviously, because of the gravity situation, I wasn't going to say it, but I thought if I had said, man, just take it in her prime, they would have nodded in agreement, because that's the way they were reacting to this loss. And what did they expect? For her to live forever? As humans, I think we often think, or at least hope, that if we refuse to acknowledge a reality, that this will somehow prevent it from coming true. And sometimes this works for things. Sometimes it even works for your problems, though I wouldn't recommend it, right? Sometimes you ignore them and they do go away. Most times not, nonetheless, but ignoring death will not make it go away. We shy away from the reality of death. We ignore it because we fear it. And our natural tendency is to stay away from the things we fear. It's totally natural. And I think our society is afraid of death. It's not a normal thing. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I don't want to go all in it. Some of it has to do with we're just not around it as much, or at least when we do come to it, it's not as natural. For example, I just think of rise of nursing homes, and there's a lot of legitimate reasons for why we have more nursing homes when it comes to the increases of medical care that just can't be had at home. But I've just even noticed in funerals, it's something that's very inconvenient, and so a lot of people are just making it as convenient as possible. We're trying to tuck away. We deal with it really quickly, and we move on, right? We try to get away from it. We naturally don't like death. We feel uncomfortable around it for a lot of reasons. And yeah, just to make things worse too, there's this way in which actually our fear of death affects some of the other fears we have. I was talking to one of my parishioners at Holy Family. He's in his mid-60s, and he related to me one time how he used to wake up in the middle of the night sweating, thinking of death when he was a younger man. And he told me he was afraid to fly in planes. He was afraid to travel, and he was afraid of a lot of other things. But as he grew more in his faith, as he became less afraid of death, these fears vanished with it. And so, so I want to talk just kind of the purpose of this talk. And I just kind of want to begin with a little bit of color of Batavia. So that being said, who's ever been to the Batavia Quarry? All right, Batavia Quarry. Who's been a lifeguard at the Batavia Quarry? Let's just see. Okay, wow. All right, anyways, that being said, I was a lifeguard at the Batavia Quarry. And so for those of you who don't know what the Batavia Quarry is, it's a mainstay in Batavia. It's been around forever. It's basically this public pool that's located just a little bit southwest of downtown. It's an old limestone quarry that was a watering hole until the Park District took it over, put in a beach, made concession stands, made a diving tower, made it more amenable to the public and probably a lot safer, than just jumping into a filled up quarry. And so growing up, this is a place where me and my friends would go. We loved the quarry, but it had some things against it. And one of those things has changed. So first off, I don't know if you remember, they fixed this problem, but that water used to be so cold. So cold. I remember giving swim lessons to kids, and the hardest thing was just getting them to go in the water. And when they came out, they were just shivering, like beanstalks. And the reason why the water was so cold, what I found out being a lifeguard, was that the liner had cracked, and so a lot of the water was just leaking into the water table. And so they're pumping this 54-degree water constantly into this pool. And it's a big pool for those of you who don't know. There's 15 guard stands. I don't know the exact how many gallons, but it's a huge body of water. And so it never gets heated properly. It always stays really, really cold. But the flip side of this was that it made it a really good place to go swimming on the hottest days of summer. As a lifeguard, those were the busiest days because where other pools, because of their size, they would warm up and feel more like bath water. But the quarry was so refreshing. Another thing why I think that counted against the quarry was its cloudiness. So because it's sand bottom, when people walk in it, it's clear at the beginning of the day. That's a kind of cool thing being a lifeguard. You saw it crystal clear in the morning, but when people started swimming in it, started walking around, they kick up sediment and it gets cloudy. And I think this is a scary thing for parents because there's this idea when you're watching your kids, you want to know where they are. And you're just always afraid of the worst thing, right? You're afraid of the unknown. There's this thought that sometimes lingers that, oh no, maybe they're trapped in the water because I don't see them. And so I can't rule out that they're not in the water because it's cloudy. And I think the biggest fear experienced, at the quarry was the high dive. So there's this huge diving tower. And there used to be a high dive until I think insurance reasons got rid of that. But the high dive was about 15 feet tall, and it was scary. I remember as a kid, you first of all had to take a swim lesson in order to show that you were a strong enough swimmer to go in the deep end. And then there's this matter of just getting over your fears and jumping off the high dive. And so as a lifeguard, you see plenty of young boys and girls walking to the edge, looking over and chickening out. And they might do this the whole day, the next day, right? But as a kid, I remember having to come over that fear. And at a certain point, you just have to jump in. You kind of have to not think a little bit, or at least not think of all the irrational things that are saying why you shouldn't do it. And once you do it once, once you do it twice, you get less and less afraid each time you do it. And as a lifeguard, the show-off thing we did was we would do gainers off the high dive. And a gainer is when you run at full speed and you do a running backflip. So you flip over and do a backflip going forward. And that's the way we just showed off at on our breaks and stuff, to show we were lifeguards. But again, you never began doing a gainer off the high dive. We all started doing it off the edge, then working our way up to the low dive, to the diving board, and then finally to the high dive. And what helps you kind of get over that fear is, sometimes messing up on the low end, where you took in a lot of water in the nose, you did a back flop or more of a belly flop. And also, too, as lifeguard, you would see some people do belly flops and back flops off the high dive, and you realize, it won't kill you, right? You won't die. And only very rarely would someone get more seriously injured from it. And so there's this reality of familiarity with doing the gainer, with doing something that's a little bit more riskier, gives you the confidence and helps you understand what you should be afraid of and what you shouldn't be afraid of. The worst thing we were afraid of was perhaps, getting the wind knocked out of us. That was probably our biggest fear. And so I kind of tell you this to help you understand what's going to happen with us talking about death, judgment, heaven, and hell. I think a lot of our fears arise from just a lack of knowledge. It's this cloudy water, and we've heard some truths here. We've seen things in television show. We've heard other hearsay things. And also because we're afraid of it, we don't know exactly what's all involved with it. And I think a lot of our fears just arise out of the unknown. And so this talk is to dispel, what fears we might have by just telling the truth, telling what fears are irrational, and also telling what fears we truly should have. And so, like Bill Parish of Meet Joe Black, tonight and tomorrow night, we're going to walk with death. We're going to confront it instead of it observing us, we will observe it. And we need to confront what we fear and see it for what it is. And by unpacking death with the help of revelation and church teachings on the last things, death, judgment, heaven, hell, my hope is that some of the fears you have concerning death will be dispelled. And so one of the big reasons why we fear death is we fear judgment. I don't know about you, but I don't like to be judged. And I'm sure no one in here likes to be judged. For example, a funny thing I do as a priest is when I find myself on my day off, I'm often actually here in Batavia with my family. And sometimes on Monday, I'll take a walk on the river walk right by the Fox River. And it's just funny. Anytime I'm out in public and I'm not in my clerics, and I'm found in the wild and found out without my clerics, I always find myself explaining why I'm not in clerics. So I'll get stopped on the path and be like, oh yeah, I'm not wearing my clerics because I'm on a walk, just stating the obvious. And I find myself doing that in the grocery store. I just wanted to sneak over to get some groceries after I lifted, so I'm not in my clerics. And I find myself explaining I just worked out and just didn't have time to go put the clerics on. And so I always find myself explaining why I'm not in clerics. And, some of the fear of the judgment, I think, comes from this fact that, I'm representative of the church. A good priest is in clerics most of the time. And there's this idea of, in a good sense that, I want people to understand that I'm a good priest. But there's also a little bit of pride, tied up with that. People will see it. I don't have to explain it away. And there's one thing we kind of as Midwesterners do to kind of, this is kind of one thing we do in order to avoid judgment. And so if someone sees you got some new clothes on or maybe some new furniture and they compliment you on it, what's one of our typical responses? I got it on sale, right? Right? We have to explain, how we didn't pay full price for that article of clothing, that piece of furniture. And that's because frugality is a virtue in the Midwest, and we don't want to be judged as unvirtuous. And because you can't tell whether something is on sale or was bought at a discounted price by looking at it, we always have to find ourselves explaining it away. And these are just two examples of kind of common behavior that we engage in in order to avoid judgment. And in these cases, in my case, it was impression management. And there's a way in which we all carefully manage how we present ourselves, whether that be through clothing, speech, social media, or behavior, to come off as acceptable or successful. And I'm just as guilty as that Midwestern kind of habit. I always get new sweaters around Christmas, and if someone compliments me, they're going to get a spiel about how I bought it at the outlet mall in Aurora, how you got to buy it after Christmas, you get 70% off. And in that, there's this idea of blending in, avoiding distinctive styles, that is, ideas or actions that don't draw attention. And there's tons of common behavior that we engage in to avoid being judged, and that includes conforming to the group, self-censorship, humor or deflection, over-preparing or perfectionism, preemptive self-criticism, avoidance, agreeableness, or people-pleasing, blaming circumstances. And I think this, hearing these common behaviors, I recognize, at least I could say for myself, I've recognized myself exhibiting all these behaviors at some time, and I found myself doing the preemptive self-criticism for this very talk tonight, constantly getting down on myself with other people, saying how horrible it's going to be, and that's humor, deflection too, so that's actually two obvious common behaviors that we engage in. And so we're all afraid of judgment, and we engage in certain behaviors to avoid it. But there are different types of judgment, and they're not all equal. For the sake of this talk, I really want to get into and unpack two types of judgment: human judgment and divine judgment. And so, just to get a little audience participation, raise your hand if you're more afraid of divine judgment than human judgment. There's really no wrong answer. They're both scary for different reasons, and I will explain that. And so what if I told you that you're actually not afraid of judgment? Judgment, per se, we're not afraid of. You made a judgment this morning when you got up, what you were going to wear, what you were going to eat, whether it was a month ago when you first heard about this talk, whether it was a week ago, whether it was at one of the masses that I was at, you made a judgment to come to this talk tonight. And there's a lot of judgments that are neutrals. There's also times where we liked being judged. For example, when you take a test and you're judged excellent and proficient in that knowledge, and you receive an A, you like that judgment. If you go under a job interview and you're judged capable to fulfill the job and the most qualified to fulfill the job and receive the job, you like that judgment. What we're afraid of is kind of two things. First of all, we're afraid of more negative judgments, whether they're true or not. And I think the scariest thing that we should be afraid of are judgments, is being judged wrongly. And for that reason, in a certain sense, human judgment is a lot scarier than divine judgment. And let me explain. First off, a little story to help me explain. So I went to Ave Maria for my undergraduate, and at the very get-go, at orientation, I really hit it off with this group of guys right from the get-go. It was such a blessing, just this fantastic group of guys. But there was one of the guys whose name was Nathan, who I kind of bumped heads with at the beginning. He was a little bit abrasive, he was loud, he was kind of over-familiar at the beginning, and I guess I just didn't have the best first impression. And that began to kind of color the way I viewed him. He could be a little bombastic in some regards. Some of his humor was a little crude, not too bad, but, and I never saw him doing homework, so I judged him to be lazy. But thank goodness, I didn't let those first impressions affect the way I continued to judge him. Thank goodness I got to know him better. And as time went on, he became my best friend. What I realized was that he was an incredibly loyal friend. He was incredibly funny, incredibly brilliant, although lazy. The reason why I didn't see him doing homework was because he worked at the late hours of the night, so he was a procrastinator. But I'm so glad I just didn't hold to my initial erroneous judgment, because I wouldn't have had this amazing friend that I got to do a semester abroad with in Rome, and I wouldn't be the godfather of his first daughter, Liesel, whose birthday is Thursday. And so I'm so glad I was able to realize the erroneous nature of my initial judgments. And I think we could all think of ways we've been misjudged. And, because of the many times we've been misjudged, the importance that we have to, that we place on it, and we kind of have to place it on first impressions, there's this reality that we're afraid to get judged because we've been judged wrongly so many times. And there's been consequences often for these misjudgments too that make it harder for us. Sometimes it's led to the loss of jobs. It's led to a loss of reputation. And at worst, it's led to the loss of life, right? There's so many people who are innocent who have died. And so first, the reason why we should fear human judgment so much is because we fear to be judged wrongly, and being exposed to further erroneous judgment, human judgment can truly be blind, capable of error, incomplete, biased, hostile. Second, we fear human judgment because we also do not like our private lives being opened to public inspection. And this isn't necessarily because we're always hiding something criminal. Rather, we just know that unsympathetic attitude of strangers, and that the details of our private lives are not to be mocked. There's a reason why I don't want you seeing me eat my breakfast and seeing me shove handfuls of spinach into my mouth. I'm not doing anything criminal. It's just not kosher. I don't know. It's efficient. I do it that way. My brother doesn't want you to see him drink, a glass of eggs like Rocky. Not because he's doing anything wrong, just because he doesn't want to be exposed, to some mockery that might ensue if someone were to get that glimpse into his life. And that's why we like the respect of our private lives, because we just know the erroneous nature of human judgment and how it's going to misperceive things that are perfectly okay, though perhaps weird, like eating spinach by the handful. And there's a great risk in submitting to human judgment. Even when one wins, for example, in a case, one loses, the veil of one's private life is torn asunder, allowing an instant for the world to enter in. And we've seen this in high-profile cases, whether it was O.J. Simpson or more recently, that Johnny Depp and Amber Heard case. That dirty laundry gets laid out there, and you just have people looking in and just kind of mocking all these things about people's lives. And so there's this reality that even if you come out the winner of that case, like O.J., there's a lot of judgment and a lot of misperception and erroneous judgment that comes your way. The more innocent one is, the more likely he or she will be fearful of human judgment. And that's because they have more to lose. And this is so true, right? A small example I think of is just when it comes to, let's say you have a drug test for work and you don't do any drugs. Well, you're fearful because there's false positives, right? And this company doesn't know you, so if you get a false positive, which has happened with those poppy seed bagels, right? You're at risk, right? You have everything to lose because you are innocent. You're open to erroneous human judgment. And so now I'm going to explain, now that we can understand the erroneous nature of human judgment, I'm going to explain why we should be less afraid of divine judgment. So divine judgment has no bias, venom, or hostility, unlike human bias. It is not incomplete. The judge, God, has complete grasp of all the facts and will give an objective judgment. He's all good. He's all-knowing. When it comes to the case, he knows everything about you. He knows everything about your life. He knows everything about the lives of the people in your life. And in the deepest thing, which he has access to, which makes him the best judge, is your heart. He knows your heart better than you. that's the kind of crazy thing is. We think we know ourselves, but if you've ever grown and matured in your life, you've realized that sometimes you misunderstood yourself, right? And you had to come to this reality of yourself. And so there's this way that God doesn't come to learn you. He knows who you are. He knows your heart. He knows your intention behind things. And the truth is, as us humans, and this is just speaking more into that erroneous nature of human judgment, we're so quick to judge people's intentions. We see one small thing, right? And we, go to crazy conclusions, damning conclusions at times too. We hire people off the way their shoes look, and there's a reality where we kind of have to do this. Unlike God, we can't know people's hearts all the way. We have to learn from exterior signs. That's how we come to knowledge as humans. And I'll explain a little bit later too, because it's important for understanding heaven and hell and purgatory. But there's this reality that we're so quick to judge people's intentions. And if we understand our own intentions, a lot of them aren't fully pure either. Only some of these great saints have fully pure intentions. And just speaking for myself, I know often when I engage in an act of charity, like a great, and I'm not going to give a percentage number, but a great percentage of that, is coming from this place of charity. But, God knows to what extent there might be a little selfishness in it. There might be some pride in it. There might be a way of just keeping up appearances. And so there's this reality where God knows our hearts better than ourselves. And so our fear is not of God when it comes to divine judgment, but ourselves. Our very fear of judgment is itself an acknowledgement of the faults on our side, which we dread to face. Thus, justice can well be a very terrible thing for us, a race of sinners, who know that we have some guilt. If truly innocent, we would have nothing to fear of divine judgment. And so I just distinguish these two types of judgment so we can better understand what we fear. Death is often more fearful than it should be because we often conflate and equate human justice with divine justice. That is, we often project all those negative experiences of human judgment we've experienced in our own life, and we project it on God. We think because we have been ill-treated by man, that we have been misjudged, that God will do that too. But as explained about his nature, he's, the best judge. There's no better judge than God. If anyone's going to judge us, we want God to judge us. For all those reasons I said before, he has all the facts of the case. He knows our heart. And so the real reason why we're afraid of death is not so much divine judgment, but because we fear that such judgment will find us wanting and go to hell. And so I guess before proceeding on to, I think it's 40 minutes, right? Really quickly, are there any questions before I go forward? Yeah. All right, people are entranced, so we'll keep going. So we're going to jump a little forward. So actually, this next part was part of my talk I was going to give yesterday, but I'm just thinking that I need more time to deal with these realities of heaven, hell, and purgatory. And so just really quickly, let's go into death. The first reason why we can fear it on a more general level is that fear of the unknown, right? There's this reality that the reality we as Christians know of resurrection, of the immortality of the soul, isn't something that's proven empirically. And so there's a lot of different approaches in understanding what comes when death comes. For example, a lot of people believe it's annihilation, that this is it. This is our existence, and then no more. And there's something very scary about that because, there's something incredibly scary about that. Sometimes there's reincarnation, this idea that you keep coming back in different bodies until you've reached a certain oneness. And sometimes there's more that's just soul kind of floating on ever after, and we honor ancestors. We see it in some, Japanese cultures, some Asian cultures. And so there's a lot of approaches to it, but what is death? So let's talk about its biological legal sense. Most states follow the Uniform Determination of Death Act, which states that death occurs with either irreversible cessation of circulatory and respiratory function or irreversible cessation of functions of the entire brain, including the brainstem. Both are accepted medical ways of determining biological death. In the Catholic philosophical sense, death is simply the separation of the body and soul. The soul is the form of the body that gives unity in life, as St. Thomas Aquinas explains. And so when that unity irreversibly ceases, death has occurred. Because this is not something, that could be empirically observed, we don't have these spiritual instruments where we're able to look at people and see the soul split from the body. And so there's this reality where we have to rely on biological signs for the body's loss of unity of life. And so the criteria that I gave above has proven helpful in determining death from a Catholic standpoint, though there's some debate, which for the sake of this talk, I'm not going to get into. When death occurs, when the body is separated from the soul, what happens? What happens? This is the quiz. We're getting into judgment now. So does anyone know what happens after death? Anyone brave enough just to yell it out? Oh, all right, doesn't matter. All right, I'll just keep talking. Well, let's see. So particular judgment is what I was looking for. So I was looking for particular judgment. So particular judgments comes immediately after death. This is a belief of our faith. This is doctrine. This judgment, this particular judgment, happens instantaneously at the place of our death. Jesus does not come down from heaven. He can't leave heaven in a certain sense, or we, at least bodily, or we come up to him to be judged. The judged soul has its place and sinks or rises to it. And so that's why it's a fitting image of seeing kind of Satan falling, because he's judged and he descends away from God. And so sometimes this particular judgment is falsely depicted as a trial. But again, this is us projecting our human experience. The most kind of formal judgment we receive here on this earth is in trials, is in legal courts. And so in the human order, there is a good sense in discussing a case from all angles, doing due diligence in the collecting of evidence, giving deliberated, measured sentence, and finally the execution of that sentence. But for a divine judge, no discussion or deliberation is necessary, as I had stated before, right? There's this idea where all those facts of your life, all the facts of the case, your entire history, the entire history of your family, everything is there before God. He doesn't need time to collect the evidence. It's all there before him. And in reality, what happens is it's the soul that judges itself. Trial is an uncovering of the deeds of a lifetime, which are made known in an instant through a divinely infused species, the natural mode of knowledge of a separated soul. And let me explain that a little bit. So we're both body and soul, as I just explained a little bit earlier. That's how we recognize death, is that separation. And the way we come into knowledge, because we are body or soul, is through the physical. It's through the material. We know this, obviously, and it's most obvious in the teaching of children. There's this idea where they have to interact with physical objects. When it comes to learning even simple abstract concepts like numbers, kids have to work with physical objects like pennies, 1 penny, 2 penny, and you need to physically see it and interact with it before they're able to at least grasp at this more abstract concept of numbers. And the same is true with spiritual realities. Angels, they're pure spirit, and there's a way in which they receive knowledge and infuse with them too. But with us, there's this reality that we come to spiritual realities through the corporeal. It's so fitting that they're sacraments because we are physical, we're body and soul, and so that God gives us grace through physical reality is fitting because we are body and soul. And so there's this way in which when we are here on this earth, we came to knowledge through metaphor, through interacting with the physical, in order to understand spiritual and more abstract realities. But at this point, that knowledge of our case, of our life, instantaneously, by divine light, is laid before us, and the soul and the full significance of our deeds are seen. In an instant, the soul knows itself and knows what it deserves and receives its just deserts. The closest thing we could imagine, again, using back these corporeal images, is supercomputers. And, even those to a certain extent aren't instantaneous. I don't even know if we combined all the computing power of every single server, computer here on this earth, if it could even process all the details of part of your life, of a year, And so, it'd probably take all the computing power of here in the next 20 years, eons before it could ever come to a judgment. But with God, it's just instantaneously. The facts are all there. Because he's always present, he just sees it as it is. And it's more our souls, more us facing the facts and reality of our lives. An immediate judgment is a fair thing. It would be cruel, to keep souls on a rack of anxiety. That's some of the anxiety we feel now on this earth is we're waiting for this judgment, right? And so waiting generation after generation to pass to learning one's life is just not a fair thing. We have a right to know immediately because there's no more to be done about it. The reality is, and I'll kind of hit this point more home as we get more into heaven and hell and purgatory, is that our time to act is here and now. The reality is as we draw breath, there's always hope. If we've been away from the Lord, we're alive. There's still time. There's still great hope. There's always, every single moment is a way in which we could turn towards God. And we have this day of reconciliation coming up for the diocese, and it's just beautiful because there's this reality that, while you're alive, there's always hope for any of our family members because we still have time to act. And, want me to go on into general judgment? Okay, we'll go into general judgment, then we'll just save heaven and hell and purgatory for tomorrow. We'll go a deep dive into that tomorrow. So the other divine judgment is what's called the general judgment or the last judgment. And this happens at the end of time with Jesus' second coming. And we hear about this a lot in Scripture. It can be a little vague in its prophecy, but it's there. And Jesus talks a lot about it in Revelation and in the book of Revelation itself. And this final judgment is the ultimate vindication of the justice and mercy of God. There's this reality where man is not an individual, but a citizen of mankind, this greater family of humanity. And so this general judgment is all of us standing before the whole world in general judgment, that all might wonder at the ways of God and his complete justice and the original justice of our sentences that happen at a particular death. Yeah, let me explain that. Maybe that sounds clear. So there's this reality where, as humans, all those judgments are made known to us. And there's no more room left for doubt or concern of why someone's here or there. There will be no grounds for gossips to wonder and speculate as, why is that one in hell? They're a pretty nice guy. Or look at John Smith in heaven. Pretty soon they'll find out who he is. This time for speculation is gone, and it's laid before us. And we see God's justice, we see his goodness in his judgments in such a clear way, and there's just no more room for doubt. The original sentence we received at the particular judgment is final and just made known to others, and this occurs in the Valley of Jehoshaphat, Armageddon, which may or may not be allegorical. The just then can suffer no unhappiness in this judgment. A revelation of their sins to the world is emphasis on their courage and penance in getting rid of sin. And it's not a cause for fear and shame, but of wondering gratitude at the mercy of God. There's this way in which today in heaven, saints like Mary Magdalene, she doesn't feel shame at the public recitation of her crimes in our readings or in the divine office, nor do those reciting the tale revel of an unholy exaltation at the uncovering of her weakness. Rather like Mary herself, she finds these things an occasion for wondering at the goodness of God. Those things that we had shame of, we'll look differently at. We'll see how God worked through them to bring our holiness, to bring our sanctification. So in conclusion, that we are judged immediately after death or at the end of time, in and of itself, isn't that scary? Like I said, he's the best judge. We're going to have the best judgment. And again, what we recognize is the deeper fear, and that's the fear of being judged and falling short and going to hell. And so we'll talk about that tomorrow. All right, that being said, I just would allow, if you feel free to go, I won't hold you for questions, but I'm ready to answer any questions that might have happened for as long as we need, but feel free, if you're all set, good to go. So does anyone have any questions? Okay, good question.
No, my question is that we get judged twice. So we get judged right after death, and then where does our soul go after judgment? Is it in a holding place before we get judged the second time?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we'll get that more tomorrow. So once your judgment, you either rise to heaven or hell or purgatory. So you go towards your end. So right away, instantaneously. There's no holding place. You go right away. And so, yeah, that's maybe I wasn't as clear. So when it comes to like the general judgment, the reality of matters, it's just that particular judgment being made known to everyone else. It's not a second judgment. It's just that judgment being made known before the whole world, all of humanity before God when he comes in his second coming. And so it's not like a second judgment. There'll be some people, who'll be alive here on earth when it comes, and when it comes to theological understanding, whether or not they die before that or the judgment happens while they're the last ones when time ceases. Nonetheless, it's just a knowing of all his judgments at once being proclaimed. And so when you have your particular judgment, it's made instantaneous, and you go to your next destination, whether it be heaven, hell, or purgatory. Yeah, a very good question. So, and there's a lot, with all these questions too, like talking about the general judgment, there's a lot more to it too. All these things, I could give a talk, I feel like, on judgment. So, all right.
Thank you. Hi, my question is this. Okay, so you die. Your body, your heart, or your brainstem, that happens. Then there's the separation of the soul from the body. And then I want clarification of divine judgment. Is it basically Jesus will lay out everything about what you did? Kind of like, picture a big tally sheet. Whatever he uses. It could be just, how is that communication? How is that happening?
So we're talking about the communication of that judgment. So what I was saying is, like, when you're separated, your soul doesn't have to go through physical reality. So there's this idea sometimes we talk in a metaphorical way of like, oh, my life flashed before me and I saw those events. That's the way of you talking about it too. And again, that's where you're in alive in a certain sense. It shows a certain consciousness and proof of the soul, sometimes those intermediary states. But the reality of matter is, like, we don't know when it is, but once that soul is separated, it's an instant. There's this way in which that knowledge is, the facts of your life are laid before you. It's not like there's extra secret knowledge necessarily, but it's laid in a clarity which you didn't see. And that's also because you're outside of this material reality. Some of those distractions are all gone. And so it's more instantaneous. Like, the facts of your life is instantaneous. Like, it's it. Yeah, I mean, and that's where it's like sometimes, and we'll see as we kind of go more into heaven, hell, reality, we're talking about these eternal realities, and like, we are very finite, right? We are born in time, we exist in time, and the kind of precursor for, like, when we talk about heaven, some people fear heaven because of thinking of eternity. Sometimes the idea of eternity could be a scary thought, and that's why some people are afraid of heaven. Yeah, but it's beautiful too. But yeah, and I'll explain that a little bit too. But like, I guess I'll just explain right now too. Well, because there's this way in which we come to knowledge through physical things, and when you were taught as a child, like, oh, heaven will be like, what's your favorite thing? It's playing baseball. You love baseball, playing baseball, but 100 times better for all time. And there's this reality where, like, we might love baseball, but we've sometimes experienced boredom in that. And then there's this idea like, I have to do that for all eternity? And so there's ways in which, metaphors are more dissimilar than similar. It helps give this reality that, yes, it is going to be this amazing thing. One of the most amazing things right now is baseball. And so, yeah, you can't imagine it. And so we do our best. And that's me kind of scrambling and stumbling, giving, pictures and images to help give reality, divine realities. And there's a way which, when it comes to church teaching, on a more formal level, there are several formal proclamations about these realities, but, it's not like this super defined place too. There's a lot of room for theological speculation. What is it like? There's some facts that are more certain than others, but the reality matter is like, we can't plummet. It's eternity because we can't comprehend fully God, right? And his goodness too. So I've got a question back here.
Thank you, Father, for your talk tonight. So I'm sure I'm not the only person in the room that has been here, that has been when somebody did pass away, And I know I had an experience where the whole room it was like a tidal wave of just joy. And I end up, I also worked with Indian people that said, oh, well, the spirit floats around for days and days. So a two-part question. How does your guardian angel fit into this initial judgment? And then if the soul just separates and goes, is that, I almost thought, well, maybe somebody's coming down to get the person? I don't know. Maybe you could explain that a little bit.
Yeah. So when it comes to what's the angel's role in that particular judgment, where they're at, and the soul moving, and so that's where it's not as clear necessarily. At least when it comes to defined a tradition, like what we believe, there's some private revelations, there's something that kind of speak into it. There's a certain maybe fittingness of our guardian angel who protect us in life, helping us to our just reward, or casting us down to our just punishment, So to what extent, on a definitive level, what the church teaches isn't as much there too. But again, you're talking more the joy at death, and we'll get a little bit more into that too. But there's this reality when we start talking about the reality of heaven is, when we think about the early martyrs, there's this idea where we're moving towards our end. Our end is God. We're a pilgrim people, and in the words of the church, this is a time of probation, of testing. And in a very real way, that's the language it uses. Sometimes we get away from it, but there is this reality where this isn't our home, right? Our fullness and completion and happiness is in God. And it begins here with our baptisms, right? There's a participation in that life by our baptisms. And there's an increase of it through the sacraments, through, prayer in our life. We begin to really enjoy it in a more deeper and fuller way. And the more we have that participation here on earth, the reality matters when we come to that time when that probation, that time of testing is over, there's this idea of coming into what we've always been waiting for, And the more we grow in faith, the more God's life lives within us, as we grow in those virtues of faith, hope, and love. Death is just it's an obstacle, to being with God in the fullest way. Now it's a lot easier said than done. There's obviously human loss and sadness too. We see that with Jesus and Lazarus today in the gospel. There is loss, and a good loss, because there is this sense of loss of this good person in my life. And often these people were instruments in helping me grow in holiness too. So there's a right sadness to the loss of others, and how they help us. So it's just kind of in a missionist idea of looking towards our end. And so we'll really kind of get it more with heaven, hell, and purgatory, that the end informs the way we act now. And the more we have an understanding of where we're headed, it's going to better inform what we do here right now. Yeah. I saw the hand up first. Yeah.
Did I hear you say that the judgment happens immediately when they've taken their last breath?
Not saying last breath. So I was saying when it comes to your particular judgment, as I was saying, we don't have these instruments to see exactly when it happens. So we base it off to the best of our knowledge, physical realities like this succession, of breathing or the brain activity, both in the brainstem. So not necessarily the last breath. No, there's a lot of kind of vague areas, so you don't see it correctly. So I'll tell you an example. So the anointing of the sick if I'm ever called an emergency situation, there's a reality where the doctors might have just ruled death, but there's not this absolute certainty that this person, truly is separated in soul. Like, it's not super clear, right? Doctors, in a certain sense, are making judgments to the best of their knowledge off exterior signs, and we've come up with this legalese talk of how to define it. But as I was saying, we can't see that, At some point, it does happen, and so that's why, given this benefit of the doubt, I'm going to anoint the body, because there's a good chance that it could be alive, right? That there's still unity between the soul. So it has nothing necessarily to do with the breath itself. Does that make sense?
Well, it does. My husband of 52 years just died Thursday.
Yeah.
And I was there.
Yeah.
And he shuddered 3 times, and then his head went back, and his mouth was hanging open, and he was no longer breathing.
Yeah.
I said to everybody, Tom just died.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so then we all kind of did different things. We put holy water on him. He'd already had the sacrament of the sick and the apostolic blessing
Yeah.
a few weeks before.
Yeah.
And he had Parkinson's for 25 years, so he had lots of suffering.
Yeah.
And he'd been with dementia and out of it the last week. Where is he? I mean, like, when did he come to his judgment?
So it's instantaneous. So that's what I'm saying. And where he went is what we'll talk about, tomorrow. And then I'll be able to get more into that, and give the comfort there too. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No. What's his name? Thomas Bronick. Okay. I'll be praying for Thomas, and I hope to. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. No. And the confidence and the more happiness is coming tomorrow. So when we get into heaven, hell, purgatory, and the realities you want to know, and some of those things you're afraid of, and diving in those things, I hope at least it dispels some of your fear, and give you some comfort. So we'll be touching on those things tomorrow. So, of course. All right. Of course. Thank you. All righty. And then let's just do one more question. Okay. I feel like I should do over. I get over here. I'll stand around a little bit afterwards, but this will be the last formal question.
My question, Father, is more like a near-death experience. You know how people say they die and then they see their soul and then they come back. So I'm thinking, when that happens, is it God's way of telling you you're going to have a second chance for a second judgment or first judgment when you die again? Is it a chance for you to try and do better on your second life? I'm just thinking that.
Yeah, so I'd say in a certain sense, like when that particular judgment happens, it's concrete. So there might be kind of like, this idea of like, when you hear sometimes, like long periods of lack of activity, whether or not the soul has left the body, that's where we're saying we don't know. Like some people have been ruled dead, in a certain sense too. I think getting away from that notion of like understand like, oh, the soul left and came back. We see it within Lazarus, and there's a certain sense it did, but it's not like this, at least when it comes to church teaching, there's this understanding of like, there's a particular judgment, and there might be anomalies to the case, but the more general rule would be it's separated. There's no just like extra judgments. And in a certain sense, maybe there's like attachment of that soul to the body in some like vague sense for that 5 minutes you've been ruled dead, I'd be more to rule in that, but there's nothing in certainty, like as I was saying, because there's the idea of not knowing is the soul truly separate from the body, but there's nothing that's teaching like, oh, you get several particular judgment. Although it's kind of weird because we talk about Lazarus and there's this idea like he was dead 4 days, and so there's some anomalies in a really true sense and shows God's miraculous nature too. And so I'd only be speculating of like how that looks. I think sometimes when there's like those near-death experiences, it's not so much that there's a judgment, but there can be this infusion and it can be a teaching moment of like, all right, like a reminder that you got some more work, got more work to do, so who knows what your judgment would have been, the reality matters, like you're alive. Like as I was saying, you still have hope and there's more time, right? And there might be that recognition that, yeah, there's some things in my life that need to change. So, all right. That being said, thank you so much for coming out tonight, and we'll get into heaven. Yeah. We'll get into heaven and hell and purgatory tomorrow, and I'll give some more resolution, I think, to some questions that have popped up. And so look forward to seeing you tomorrow. God bless.